So this story is extremely sad, and it strikes a little close to home because it's the town I grew up in. A man named Igor Lannis in Walled Lake, Michigan, murdered his wife, killed their dog, and tried to kill their younger daughter. After he snapped and went down the QAnon rabbit hole, found himself listening to Alex Jones every day and getting more and more radicalized. His eldest daughter was at a birthday party, who was 21 years old, and she posted this, which I hadn't seen yet, and I will tag where I got this from. So if y'all think that this shit isn't driving you crazy, if you don't think you're in a cult, this is not the first time something like this has happened. This is not the first reporting of a father or a loved one going batshit crazy after listening to Alex Jones, QAnon, and all these loser Trump humpers. Be careful.
Good evening, good evening, good evening. Thank you for joining me here with Mindful Mondays with Conversations with Taz. This is why education is so crucial. This is why critical thinking is so needed. Cults, indoctrination, grifting, racism, it flourishes in a garden of ignorance, of unknowing. And that individual is 100% correct. This is not the first instance of someone going after their loved one, someone turning on their loved one, somebody being killed behind things like this. This is part of the reason why I take the time to spread the knowledge that I have and the research that I have done. I know it's been 2 weeks. Last week we just chilled out for the holiday. But getting back to where we left off and discussing the Espionage Act of 1917, let's pick up in May 1918, where sedition charges were laid under the Espionage Act against Watchtower Bible and Tract Society President Judge Joseph Rutherford and 7 other Watchtower directors and officers over statements made in the Society's book, The Finished Mystery, published earlier the year. According to the book, here's the passage. Nowhere in the New Testament is patriotism, a narrow-minded hatred of other peoples, encouraged. Everywhere and always murder in its every form is forbidden, and yet under the guise of patriotism, civil governments of the earth demand of peace-loving men the sacrifice of themselves and their loved ones and the butchery of their fellows, and hail it as a duty demanded by laws of heaven. The officers of the Watchtower Society were charged with attempting to cause insubordination, disloyalty, refusal of duty in the armed forces, and obstructing the recruitment and enlistment services of the United States while it was at war. Patriotism, as far too many interpret it within the United States, has become the encouragement of loss of life, the sacrifice of life, or the taking of life. That's why nowadays, when you hear people talking about they're a patriot, they also talk about, a civil war, violently taking this, violently taking that. If you remember last week, we discussed the man who had the rape manifesto, because this is how they believe that they can prove their patriotism. Now, a little bit of background on the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. A lot of you all know about Watchtower because of Jehovah's Witnesses, and they like to pass them out. This particular one was the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Pennsylvania, established February 16th, 1881. Founder is Charles Taze Russell. It was incorporated on January 15th, 1884. No stock, and it is a nonprofit organization. It is the main legal entity used worldwide for the Jehovah's Witnesses to direct, administer, and disseminate doctrines for the group, and they're often referred to as the society. For a large part of the Espionage Act is when the United States is at war or at conflict with another nation, another state, if you will, you cannot speak out about it. Like the protests going on that happened during the Vietnam War, etc. No bueno. They want absolute dedication and determination. They don't want anyone to make it seem like the United States is weaker than what it is, that there are any cracks in the system within the United States. Everything is perfect. We are a united front, fighting fascism, fighting whatever. That is not always the case, because we know the United States military is highly divisive and riddled with racism and racists. The practices used for many times to determine who would be a part of going to war was not historically copacetic. So also in 1918, on June 21st, 7 of the directors, including Rutherford, were sentenced to the maximum of 20 years imprisonment for each of the 4 charges, and their terms were to be served concurrently. They served 9 months in the Atlanta penitentiary before being released on bail at the order of SCOTUS Louis Brandeis. And in April of 1919, an appeals court ruled that they had not had the intemperate and impartial trial of which they were entitled, and their convictions were reversed. Now, this particular SCOTUS, let me give you some background information on him, because he was like the right to privacy SCOTUS. He was a jurist that was very well versed in it. He took it very seriously, and he's like, we can't, violate somebody's right to privacy or their freedom of speech when they're not speaking out against the government. They're just saying patriotism should not result in loss of life. Now, Louis Dimbits Brandeis, November 13th, 1856 to October 5th, 1941. And I give you all their birth and death dates because people try to act like, nobody that was alive during this point had anything to do with legislation that we carry today. Yeah, people were living longer than what you were taught in school to believe. People crossed generations and had a great deal of influence in what we have to deal with to this day. Excuse me. He was a United States lawyer and an associate justice for SCOTUS from 1916 to 1939. Starting in 1890, he helped develop the right to privacy concept via a Harvard Law Review article. This is Roscoe Pound, a legal scholar, credited him with accomplishing nothing less than adding a chapter to our law. He published Other People's Money and How the Bankers Used It. He suggested how to curb the power of money trust and large banks. He fought against powerful corporations, monopolies, public corruption, and mass consumerism. He was dubbed throughout his career as the people's lawyer. So he was, on paper, the epitome of an impartial, fair SCOTUS. Now, can't talk about the Espionage Act without discussing how the directors of the Watchtower were brought up on charges. One aspect is the Sedition Act of 1918. On May 16th, 1918, an act of the United States Congress was that extended the Espionage Act of 1917 to cover a broader range of offenses, notably speech and the expression of opinion that cast the government or and war effort in a negative light or interfered with the sale of government bonds. Basically, they wanted to make sure we would pay for their war. It forbade the use of disloyal, profane, scurrilous, or abusive language about the United States government, its flag, or its armed forces, or that cause others to view the American government or its institutions with contempt. But I thought it was the greatest place on the world. Everybody should be just so cheerful, right? So basically, if you prohibit anybody from being willing to put money in addition to taxpayer dollars into the government for it to be able to go to war, prevent the government from recruiting young adults that can't even rent a hotel room or a car on their own from putting their lives on the line for somebody else's business, not ours, you could be charged. Those convicted generally received imprisonment sentences from 5 to 20 years. They generally went for the max. And here's the biggest caveat. The act allowed the Postmaster General, yes, from the United States Postal Service, the USPS, to refuse to deliver mail that met those same standards for punishable speech or opinion. It applied only to times when the United States is at war. Now, the law was repealed on December 13th, 1920, but it was not before we had a Postmaster General that used this to his advantage to basically, he was like McCarthyism before McCarthyism was a thing. Because when things go through the mail, remember when this act was in place, the Sedition Act of 1918, we didn't have the scanners that we have today. So how would they think about it? How would they know what was being sent out if it wasn't in postcard or newsletter form? Well, in unenveloped newsletter form. So the Espionage Act made it a crime to interfere with military recruitment, and for anyone to aid a nation that was at war with the United States during wartime. So we know that the United States is marketed as the melting pot of the world. So let's use the Russian-Ukraine war of right now as an example. Say we were Russia and you immigrated from Ukraine 20 years ago, but you still have family there. Previously, you went to visit them. They'd come visit you. When they were struggling, you'd send them money. We know during the course of this war, certain monetary institutions have cut out, the ability for people to have money transferred or whatever. So if you were to transfer money to your family to help them out because they're like, hey, we're starving, we're in the midst of war, that would be deemed illegal. That would be deemed treasonous. That would be deemed against the Espionage Act of 1917, and you could be criminally charged. Now, this act was not without vigilantes or mobs of people trying to persuade lawmakers that the law was inadequate, not unlawful, not discriminatory, inadequate. So there were people just like now that wanted unpopular speech criminalized. So it's like, even if you weren't speaking out against the war or against the United States government, if somebody's like, yeah, what do you think of the war? And you're like, not really my thing, not really about that. They wanted the ability for you to be criminalized and penalized underneath this act. And this is part of the act that I said is kind of resurfacing with Trump, where his sycophants are now like, oh no, this is politically motivated. They're just trying to use it against him for political gain. You had actual documents in your residence. That's not using this against you for political gain. No one's upset because of your speech. We've been listening to your bull crap, uneducated spewings and your lies for decades now. Now, there were some people, of course, Republicans, most notably Henry Cabot Lodge and Hiram Johnson, who defended free speech yet complained that I can't talk tonight, that the administration had failed to use the laws already in place. Now, regarding the restrictions on free speech, by this time, then President Theodore Roosevelt also voiced opposition to the restrictions on free speech that were included in the act. But once again, they were getting caught up in everybody's interpretation of what patriotism is, what it should be, what it should not be. And this is one of those times I wish the United States would just give a clear-cut legal definition of what it means to be legally patriotic. Now, most newspapers at the time didn't show they didn't sway either way regarding the act. But here's the kicker. The whole point of the Espionage Act of 1917 being brought up and being pushed through Congress was so that it could be enacted during the war. But just like everything else within the United States, the legislation came so late in the war, just a few months before Armistice Day, that prosecutions under the provisions of the Sedition Act were very few and far in between. Just like mine. Why can't I talk tonight? My apologies, you guys. Molly Steinman. Where is she at? Okay. Molly Steimer, November 21st, 1897 to July 23rd, 1980. Born Martha Alperin, a Russian-born anarchist activist within the United States. She opposed World War I and lived in exile in France and Mexico. She was one of the few that were convicted due to her work and a speech that she made on behalf of the Industrial Workers of the World Labor Union. She was arrested in Portland, Oregon, and then convicted once the war was over, but once again, nothing really stuck very far. Now, post World War I, this is where the racist cuckold of Woodrow Wilson, in all technicality a president, steps in. Now, his attorney general, Thomas Watt Gregory, viewed the bill as a political compromise. They hoped to avoid hearings that would embarrass the administration for its failure to prosecute offensive speech. They also feared other proposals that would would have withdrawn prosecutorial authority from the Justice Department and placed it in the War Department, creating a sort of civilian court martial process of questionable constitutionality. It did finally pass 48 to 26 in the Senate, 293 to 1 in the House. The sole dissenting vote in the House was cast by a socialist by the name of Meyer London of New York. But in April and June of 1911, they were still arresting people, most notably when the case was upheld. Well, when the Sedition Act was upheld in SCOTUS, Abrams v. United States. And let's take a look at that. Abrams v. United States, 1919, upheld the 1918 amendment, the Sedition Act, to the Espionage Act of 1917. It made it a criminal offense to urge the curtailment of production of the materials needed to wage war against Germany. Now, if someone could be arrested, tried, charged, convicted, have appeals leading all the way up to the SCOTUS, it is upheld for them urging for people to interfere with materials needed to go to war. Why are there people stating that Trump cannot be indicted under this act for taking highly classified documents that would lead to war? Also, let's not forget one other caveat in dealing with Trump: the simple fact that while president, he asked for a listing of active CIA members. And it has been highly insinuated that within the documents that are missing, there's plausible evidence that there was a continuation of that listing, where active CIA operatives have already lost their lives. And there are those that had to be pulled from the field to not jeopardize their identities. And people still don't think that he should be charged underneath this act. And here's one little caveat. When everybody is wondering, we all know that it's pretty obvious through body language and the fact that she disappears from being anywhere with him publicly. And it appears that they have separate residences within Mar-a-Lago. Here's a little caveat as to why Melania renegotiated her prenup before moving officially into the White House at the beginning of Trump's term, as well as why she's so quiet and so distant from him now. I think she has the better legal team. And I think that it's partially because of the Alien Registration Act. And before you go, but Taz, didn't she become nationalized as a citizen? Yeah, but there have been a couple of people who have been tried and convicted underneath this act, and they have been deported back. So nothing is absolute within this country, dear, unless you're born here and you're white, straight, cisgendered, and faux Protestant male. But the Alien Registration Act came into effect June 28th, 1940. It's also called the Smith Act. It set criminal penalties for advocating the overthrow of the United States government via force or violence. Now, do y'all understand her statements regarding the January 6th self-coup? It requires non-citizen adults to register with the federal government. Approximately 215 people have been indicted under this, and in 1957, a series of SCOTUS decisions reversed numerous convictions for being unconstitutional, and it has been amended several times. Now, there have been a few repeals, as I stated before, regarding the Espionage Act and the amendment of the Sedition Act, because you've had the Sedition Act of 1798, the Sedition Act of 1918. This is why it's so important to pay attention to the dates. But on December 13th, 1920, there was a sweeping repeal of wartime laws. So it was a full repeal of the original Sedition Act. And in 1921, President Woodrow Wilson offered clemency to most of those convicted under the Sedition Act. But not everyone received clemency, just those that were like, hey, you're racist, I'm racist too, let's be racist buddies. Go ahead and sign that clemency. Sorry, you guys. Uh, I'm pretty sure Mayor Garland has considered this, but just to put a little additional information in your head regarding the current circumstances and situation with Trump, he could also be charged under the Violent Radicalization and Homegrown Terrorism Prevention Act of 2007 if it would have passed, because it was supposed to take measures against domestic terrorism. But it is really interesting when you history can be very interesting, and it makes current events a lot clearer. The further we go through this, hopefully it's becoming more clear to you all why Trump is sweating bullets the way that he is, why his attorneys are utterly making fools out of themselves with all these narratives that they're coming up with. And it's bad when attorneys have to get attorneys, and that's what's happening. So well, thank you. I'm glad that you can understand. Okay, went over the Black Chamber. Went over Scarbeck. Actually, we didn't go over Scarbeck. So, one of the pivotal people behind this act is Ivan Chambers Scarbeck. Born May 8th, 1920, died January 11th, 1970. He was a United States State Department official who was convicted of giving information to the Polish UB, which is the secret police, during the Cold War after he became in a romantic affair with a Polish woman and was blackmailed by Polish intelligence agencies. Now, I say he's pivotal because there were some changes made to the Espionage Act where, for a period of time, technically you could only break the law regarding this act if you were on United States soil, a territory of the United States, a colony of the United States, if you will, or within the 50 states. I don't know why we say 50 states, because there are a couple commonwealths in there, but I digress. It's a conversation for another day. But this man, and I really think, I'm starting to wonder if the way that Scarbeck was taken down, if it's partially going to be how Trump is going to be taken down. Bear with me. We're going to let this story unfold, because this is this is better than telenovela. So in 1956, oh no, a little background. From 1942 to 1946, he was in the U.S. Army. He was a staff sergeant. In 1956, he went to work at the State Department, and he was awarded for meritorious service. But then in 1958, he was deployed to the U.S. Embassy in Warsaw, Poland, as an office manager. Now, with him over in Warsaw was his wife, his two sons, and his daughter. Whole family went with him. Whole family. Now, stick a pin in the fact that his wife is there, okay? Which means any shenanigans he gets in, okay? She's there. The whole family, the 3 kids are there too. Remember that. Now, he admitted he loved taking family trips in the countryside, music. He was so well liked by his staff. He was basically the perfect employee for the State Department. There was nothing that said that he was corrupt. There was nothing that said that he was corruptible. He was the he was like the quintessential 1950s sitcom dad. He was like Mr. Cleaver, okay? Remember that. Now at 39 big old years old, in 1959, he decided to let a 22-year-old woman's milkshake bring him to the yard. Ursula Maria Discher. And this man had it bad. He was the quintessential simp. He was simping hard. So he got her an apartment, visited her at the apartment. He was so regular with this. And remember, he works for the State Department. You know, where you give expense reports. You know, where there's regular security clearance checks, things like that. So in 1960, agents of the Polish Security Service, because you know, you're in a foreign country, they're going to keep an eye on you, especially when they know you're working for a government that is not yours. And I'm pretty sure she helped set him up. Can't prove it, but I'm pretty sure. Surprised the two, and this is why I think she was part of the setup, while they were in bed. They took photographs. Where my ladies at? Where are my femme presenting NBs? Because I don't care how comfortable you are in your skin. Somebody come busting through your door, you're not just going to be still laying there like, yeah, baby. That was good. Smile for, pose for the camera, pose for the camera, pose for the camera. That's not what's going on. So they used it. Now, they done took the pictures, dipped out. They come back to him and use the pictures to blackmail him into giving secret information from the U.S. government. Now, you would think, but Taz, he's a family man. His kids are over there. Of course he gave up the information. He wanted to protect his family. Skirt, skirt. This is why I told y'all. Pay attention to the fact that his wife and kids were there. And that he got this heifer an apartment. So if he got her the apartment, either he was there to sign all the paperwork and give the money, or it was in his name. But he claimed out of his own mouth, out of his own pie hole, where he was drinking that milkshake from, that brought him to the yard, that the secret police had threatened Miss Disher with arrest and prosecution. So he cooperated with them to save her from prison time. All she was doing was getting her back banged out and possibly working with the secret police. What was she gonna go to jail for? Like, they knew how deep he was in. They knew that he had some usher confessions going on. That they didn't even say, hey, we'll mess up your wife and kids. No. They didn't even try to Black Widow the situation with the daughters. They threatened the mistress. This is why we say, y'all new age side chicks ain't got nothing on them old school mistresses. This man was willing to destroy his family, his career, his life, his freedom. At 40 big old years old, because he did this for a year. He started off at 39. He got busted at 40 for some 22 to 23-year-old. Ooh, nah, nah, nah. And then he couldn't just stop there. Like, I'm gonna give y'all what y'all need to protect her. He didn't even say, don't tell my wife about it. No, he helped her escape to West Germany. He found another apartment for her there and gave her some money to help her out. You know she not coming back, my boy. Where's his friends? Where's his brothers? Where's his daddy? This why you need a black friend in your life that would have told you, homie, it ain't worth it, bruh. It ain't worth it. On June 13th, 1961. June 13th, 1961. He's picked up and arrested by the FBI. July of the same year, a grand jury in the U.S. District of D.C. indicted him on one count of taking a government document and 3 counts. One under one law, 3 counts under another law. This was the first ever prosecution under the new caveat that, hey, you out of the country, we can still get you. See, they were hiding under those technicalities where it's like, well, I know this legislation exists, but I'm not in the U.S. right now. I'm over here. She flapping them eyes at me. I got you, boo. You know. So the law that he was arrested under had been created as a part of the McCarran Internal Security Act, the Subversive Activities Control Act of 1950, during the Red Scare of the 1950s by Senator Carl Earl Mund. Now, this started as a reaction to Alger Hiss, which we'll get to later. But y'all, by November, he was found guilty of the Title 50 counts, but not guilty under a Title 18 count. Cool. You're still going to prison, my boy. In November of 1961, he was sentenced to 3 consecutive terms of 10 years in prison, the maximum penalty that law allowed. Y'all remember the wife, right? Y'all remember the wife? Guess what the wife said? With her whole chest, after being internationally embarrassed and disrespected, she said, and I quote, "I'm going to stick with him." Girl, if you don't take that bread, leave that head and leave. What? Couldn't have been me. Ain't no way. Now, he tried to appeal his conviction with SCOTUS, and his attorneys argued that the phrase classified documents did not include documents classified by an ambassador. Sound familiar? Only those classified by the president. See where these loopholes are coming from? From the Trump legal team? Like, they might be a collection, a rotation, if you will, of the Three Stooges. They're like the Three Stooges of soap operas, where they just keep changing the actors but not the characters. But there's caveats that are coming from other cases associated with the Espionage Act. Is that becoming more clear to y'all now? So let me let me go back and repeat this one more time for y'all. His lawyers argued that classified documents did not include documents classified by an ambassador, only those classified by the president, that Scarback should have been able to challenge the classification, that Scarback was authorized to disclose the documents, that his confession was coerced and therefore inadmissible, and his confession was not corroborated by other facts. My boy, you gave the information over And just like Trump, you admitted that you had it and they were classified, but they weren't classified by the right person for it to be criminal for you. See how this roundaboutism is going? There's nothing creative about politicians within the United States that still subscribe to white supremacy and racial tropes. Y'all see why I tell y'all this week after week after week? I'm sorry. Okay, so SCOTUS denied to hear the case at all in June of 1963. They were like, no, sir. No, sir. We're not going to play semantics with you. You were a high ranking official within the government. You knew the parameters of your position. You decide to give up the parameters of that position for some punani. That's on you. You should have had more peen control. However, his consecutive sentences were converted to concurrent and he was paroled in 1966. So basically, he served approximately 5 years. If you haven't figured out thus far, and all the ones that we've discussed thus far, they were either white presenting individuals. Now, hold on. I'm too tickled by this. Okay, so Alger Hiss. We didn't even run an ad today. Look at this. See, learning is fun. Alger Hiss, I told you, was another one that his case caused some changes within the Espionage Act, how it's prosecuted, how it's interpreted, and how it's looked at. So Alger Hiss, November 11th, 1904 to November 15th, 1996, a year after I graduated high school. And if any of y'all in the comment section call me old, your pinky toe. So in 1948, a United States government official he was a United States official accused of spying for the Soviet Union in the 1930s. Small caveat, there was a huge conspiracy regarding people spying on behalf of the Soviet Union, the USSR, if you will. There was even speculation that there was like a whole ring of people doing this. There were people coming out claiming that they were a part of this ring. They knew who was a part of it. As always, just like what they're banking on with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, they're waiting for people to just basically blow the whistle on people. But we all know historically within the United States, people blow the whistle on opponents of theirs, people that they're jealous of, people that they're envious of, people that they want to leg up on. So, unfortunately, by the time he was accused in 1948, the espionage statute of limitations had expired. Another caveat I need you all to pay attention to when it comes to Trump, hence the fact that they are moving so quickly and why they were so undercover with their investigation for so long, because there are time limits on these things. It ain't forever. He was convicted of perjury in connection with the charge in 1950, 2 counts of perjury. On August 3rd, 1948, Whittaker Chambers, a former U.S. Communist Party member, testified before the House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC, that Hiss was secretly a part of the party while in federal service. Hiss sued Chambers for libel. Chambers allegedly provided proof of espionage with Hiss during the pretrial of the libel case. Nobody knows what that information was. That resulted in a hung jury. January 1st of 1950, he was found guilty. The sentence was 2 concurrent 5-year sentences, but he served 3.5 years. The pretrial positions helped establish the United Nations as a U.S. State Department official and a UN official. His positions. He was a United Nations representative, also as part of the United States Department official. Then he became a full-time UN official. Later in life, after being released from prison, he became a lecturer and an author. Now, Mr. Whittaker Chambers ain't shit. April 1st, 1901 to July 9th, 1961. He was born, Whittaker Chambers was born J. Vivian Chambers. From 1922 to 1959, he was a U.S. writer and editor. From 1926 to 1939, he was a translator. From 1932 to 1938, he was a self-confessed Soviet spy. In 1938, he defected from the Soviet underground. In 1939 to 1948, he was a Time magazine employee. Time magazine, you got some explaining to do. From 1949 to 1950, he testified about the Ware Group in the Hiss perjury case. And the Ware Group is the group that I was speaking on briefly that everyone proclaimed was full of Russian spies. In 1952, he wrote a memoir called Witness. That's when it was released. 1957 and 1959. He was the National Review. Jesus Christ, my children are relentless. National Review editor. 1984, he was posthumously awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Ronald Reagan. Yeah, Ronald Reagan. Now, his testimony in the Hiss trial was later contradicted by an actual member of the Ware Group who went on to be one of the first paid informants of the FBI. Well, we're going to put a pin in it for this week, and I will see you all next Monday for the next edition of Mindful Mondays as we go over the Espionage Act of 1917. As always, each one teach one, each one reach one. Go ahead.
The Fab Four reunited because, of course, when Harry and Meghan first got engaged, back, you just renamed them.
Oh, guess what? Yeah, you just getting the car by yourself. But I'm going to open the door for my queen.
Yeah,
and she's hiding them all the time. And I'm going to close the door for you, too.
Oh, yeah. When Harry and Meghan got engaged.
That's a man for you.
Walking around with his wife. He don't care. His mind is always on her.